Here in Tokini Andy, I spend a lot of time teaching you guys the grammar from Genki, but I've never really talked about how you can use Genki as a self-study tool to help you learn Japanese. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about how to use Genki along with some other tools to improve your Japanese even better, especially if you're self-studying. A lot of you watching are also already members of my Patreon, so I wanted to include some tips and tricks on how to use those tools to help improve your Japanese even more. For those of you who aren't patrons yet, you may want to check out the link down in the description to see how you can use those tools to help you learn from Genki even faster. Thank you so much to those of you who are already patrons. For those of you who are not patrons and don't intend on becoming patrons, there's still tons of tips in this video that can help you out too. If you stick around to the end, you're going to find out how to use the textbook most effectively, how to learn vocabulary most effectively, how to learn grammar most effectively, how to use the textbook practice and the workbook to review effectively, how to maybe approach learning kanji, and how to get lots and lots of reading practice. I'll also be covering how to get speaking and listening practice. So you ready? Let's get started. The first thing I want to cover today is how to work most effectively with the vocabulary that is available in Genki. When you're about to start a new lesson in Genki, the first thing you should probably do is review the vocabulary. One of your best bets is to put vocabulary words from Genki into an Anki deck. I haven't covered Anki too much on this channel, but Anki is an SRS, or Spaced Repetition System, application both on PC and on different phones that allows you to make flashcards which are given to you when you need them. So basically they use a spaced repetition system, which means that if you look at a card and you remember the answer, you won't see it again till the next day. And if you remember it the next day, you won't see it again for 3 days, etc., until maybe you don't see the card again for months. And if you remember it after months, well, it just goes away because that means you now know the words. That's spaced repetition. Spaced repetition applications are going to be a major part of your toolbox, so you really should get used to using them right now. There's other spaced repetition systems out there as well, like Memorize, which is a very popular one. And there's also pre-made decks based on Genki on all of these platforms, so you could just find ones that are pre-made or you can make some yourself. I often recommend adding sentences to your Anki decks so that you can see what those words are like used in a sentence. But in the very beginning, it may be a little bit hard for you to find sentences using those vocabulary words. Eventually, I plan on adding an Anki deck to the Patreon that has sentences for every single vocabulary word, but I haven't been able to do that just yet. Speaking of the Patreon, there's actually vocabulary videos for every lesson we've covered so far. In those videos, you can repeat after and shadow native pronunciation for every single vocabulary word. E-adjectives.
欲しい
To want a thing. Now this is for wanting items generally. If you want to do something and there's a verb for that, then you should be using the verb.
欲しい欲しい
Hoshii. Non-adjectives. I also go over different meanings of certain words, little quirks that these words have, and more information generally on vocabulary that is a little bit difficult. We also add examples to sentences that we feel like really need the examples for them to be understandable. Example.
飴をあげる
To give candy. So one of the first things you should be doing if you are a Patreon member is watching those vocabulary videos when you start a new lesson. That'll help you get a feel for all the vocabulary that is coming at you soon. Aim to learn anywhere between 5 and 20 new words from each lesson each day, ideally using your spaced repetition decks. Some people I know like to watch the vocabulary videos once per day to really make it stick. The next thing to cover is reviewing the grammar points in each lesson within Genki. Now, the grammar descriptions within Genki aren't always the best in the world. In fact, depending on which edition you have, some of them can be downright useless. Some of them, though, are quite good. So in the beginning, I suggest reading through each of these sections to try and get a grasp of what's going on. Especially pay attention to the example sentences and try to see if you can figure out how they're built and what meaning they're trying to get across. Another thing to consider is making a deck within your SRS app, adding each one of these sentences so that you can use the magic of SRS with grammar as well. The next thing you're going to do is clear up any misunderstandings you had from your reading of the grammar by watching the Tokini Andy grammar streams. I strongly recommend watching the stream cuts, which cut out all of the conversation and sidetracks and leave just the grammar points and the grammar explanations intact. They're much shorter and a little bit easier to follow if you're not there live. If you are caught up to where we are on the live stream, I'd love to see you at one of them. You can ask questions live and interact with the community within chat there. It's a lot of fun. After you go through the Tokini Andy grammar breakdowns, I suggest reading through the chapter one more time to see if you understand it this time. Hopefully the sentences will make a little bit more sense, and maybe the explanations will as well. At this point, you're going to want to try and make 2 or 3 sentences for each section on your own. Don't make them too complicated, just use words that you know to use that grammar point and make a sentence. Don't try and combine them with a bunch of other things and try to make some massive monster of a sentence. just make a simple sentence using those grammar points and see if you understand what's happening. You could then have your italki teacher check them for you, or you could ask on the Tokini Andy Discord for someone to check them for you. Remember, don't make them too complicated, just make them simple enough so that they get the grammar point down and you get some use with them. If you get the confirmation that they are okay to go, I suggest adding them to your Anki deck. The next thing you're going to want to consider doing is the textbook practice. Now, the textbook practice within Genki is clearly made for a classroom environment, so generally speaking, it's made for groups, at least pair work. Almost every single exercise requires a partner, but you can complete quite a few of them by just writing down your answers. Unfortunately, they're meant for getting speaking practice, but it's kind of hard when you're solo. Unless you're a member of the Patreon. On the Patreon, we do textbook practice videos for every single lesson where Yuki or I are your partners. Ask me if I can do the same things that you just said that Ando-san can do. Example, swim, 1 kilometer.
1キロ泳げますか?
いいえ、泳げません。Sing, Japanese song.
日本語の歌を歌えますか?
はい、歌います。So you can actually basically have a classroom environment with Yuki and I by watching these videos, if you do them the way they're supposed to be done. So at this point, if you are a Tokini Andy patron, I suggest doing those videos now. Now, if you are doing this solo and you're not a patron, I do suggest writing down your answers and then trying to say them out loud. A great idea would be to record them and then throw them up on SoundCloud or something and then ask natives to correct them for you. Another option would be to do these textbook practice sections online with a tutor or something, which you could find from a website like italki. The next step I suggest taking is moving on to the reading section in the back of the book. A lot of people don't realize that in the back of Genki, there's a whole nother reading section. It presents kanji and gives you excerpts of books and things like that to read. There's one section for each lesson, so jump back to the back of the book and take a look at that right now if you haven't already. Now, I wouldn't suggest learning kanji from these sections. There's nothing really special about it. If you want to learn kanji, and I do suggest that you do at some point, I'd suggest a tool something like WaniKani or RTK, Remembering the Kanji by James Hasig. I haven't done reviews of either of those yet, but eventually I do hope to do that. There's also a lot of other tools out there that many people swear by, and I'm not sure which one I consider to be the best one yet. I personally used Remembering the Kanji, and to learn readings I just read books, but kanji is not my strongest point. A lot of people would prefer something like WaniKani, and from what I've heard, it's great for some people, but some other people don't like it, so try out a few different things and see what you like. I suggest trying out WaniKani for free for the first 3 lessons, or checking out Remembering the Kanji by James Hasig, and then just reading books to try and pick up the readings. So while I don't recommend learning kanji from the back of Genki, I do recommend reading the excerpts that are available there. There's short stories, there's newspaper articles, and many other things, and they're all actually really good, so please read those and learn the extra vocabulary in the back there. You're gonna find it really helpful. Remember to add any new words you learn here into your Anki deck. You can actually use the sentences from the reading excerpts where those new words show up to add to your Anki deck as well, so that you can have sentence cards. I'll try and make a video at some point talking about how I use Anki to study so that you can see what kind of cards I'm using. The next thing we need to cover is listening. Now, if you have the 3rd edition of Genki, there's no CD in the back. Instead, they use the Oto Navi application, which is on your phone. It's not the best, but it is something, so you can use it to get listening practice by listening to the different exercises from, for example, the workbook or the textbook, and I think there's actually listening for the reading sections as well, so check that out. If you're a member of the Patreon, we have listening and shadowing videos where we have listening practice, and then we have you shadow those listening practice sections so that you can get practice speaking. Shadowing is where you try and repeat along with someone who's speaking so that you can get used to the rhythm and pronunciation of Japanese. Of course, you don't have to get it perfect. The whole point is trying to sort of anticipate what is going to be said, which helps your output a lot. I strongly recommend shadowing even if you're not a patron because it really helped me get better at Japanese. My flow, my rhythm, it got way better after I started shadowing. So the videos on Patreon have a modified version of the Genki dialogues as well as all the dialogues from the Genki live streams that I do, with Yuki and myself playing different characters that you can shadow. So at this point, if you're already a patron, I suggest doing that video. At this point, you should pretty much have a good grasp of the grammar and the different vocabulary from the lesson that you're on. If you have the workbook and you like doing workbooks, at this point I suggest doing the workbook exercises. If you finish off the workbook and you still feel like you don't have a grasp on the grammar, read through the chapter one more time or go back to the Tokini Andy grammar reviews and go to the point you don't understand, watch through, see if you can get a grasp for it. If you still don't understand, feel free to ask on the Discord or ask during one of my live streams. I'm more than happy to try and help you out with that. Now, if you're already a patron, at this point I recommend doing the lesson test. We have tests for all of the lessons in Genki 1, and when we finish Genki 2, we'll be adding tests for all of that as well. These are a really great way to test and see if you actually understand everything you've gone through so far. Now, at this point, if you happen to be caught up with where we are at in the live streams, every other week, we do a practice live stream for the previous lesson. So for example, if this Sunday we do lesson 15, the following Sunday we'll be doing a practice live stream for lesson 15. So basically you can join in and I give different practice problems where you make sentences based on the previous lesson. Now the great thing about this is that if you make mistakes, which I hope someone does, I can use those mistakes to sort of steer you in the right direction and hopefully catch your blind spots. This is a great way to solidify your understanding of the lesson. If you can't join those practice live streams, I strongly recommend getting a tutor on italki or somewhere else so that you can practice the grammar points from these sections. Now, if after all of this you need some more practice, there's a website down in the description that has tons of practice exercises that are really, really great and based on Genki. I believe that website is entirely free as well. Now, even after doing all of this for every single lesson, your Japanese is not going to be perfect. You're still going to be struggling with reading and writing and speaking, and there's going to be lots more work to do. One thing that you really need to be doing all throughout your experience is listening to and trying to read native material. Try watching an anime you like or a TV show you like in Japanese. Doing this, you're gonna pick up on little things that you learn throughout the week. You might hear new words that you learned, and every time you hear a new word that you've heard before, it's gonna help it stick even better. And you'll actually start to see how it's used in context. Now, in the beginning, you're gonna have a very hard time understanding what you're hearing, but over time, your listening will get better and better and better. So the best way to improve your listening is to listen. Listen to native material. Even if you don't understand everything, it's definitely good practice. As for reading native material is probably a little bit hard during Genki 1. When you get into Genki 2, you can probably start jumping into some stuff. But before that, I strongly recommend checking out the application Satori Reader. Now, before I would have recommended getting graded readers, but graded readers are actually very, very expensive, and Satori Reader has a free version and there is a monthly paid version, but it's well worth the plethora of material that is available there. I actually did a review of it right over here. I'm not gonna do a full review here. Check out the review here if you want to learn more about it. It's a great way to get sort of transitioned into native material. Another great resource for reading is NHK NewsWeb Easy, so there's a link down in the description for all of these things. Now, your speaking's still gonna need a little work at this point, probably a lot of work actually. One way you can work on that is I strongly recommend checking out italki. There's a link down in the description where you can find community tutors and professional tutors who you can do actually Genki lessons one-on-one with, or you can just do speaking practice with. It's really up to you and the tutor how you wanna go about it. But trying out a few tutors there is a great way to get some speaking practice. It's very daunting at first, but I do recommend doing it if you want to get better at speaking. So anyway, there's a million ways you could go about using Genki to learn Japanese, and you're still gonna need other materials on top of it. It's not enough to just use Genki, but you can get quite far with it. If you'd like to start learning the grammar right now, there's a playlist right here that can help you. And if you'd like to get even more practice material like the stuff I talked about here, check out the Patreon. There's tons of content there that can help you get more out of Genki, and there's more coming every other week. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. Hope to see you next time. Have a good one.
ありがとうございます。
お疲れ様でした。
また次のビデオで会いましょうね。